Good evening. It is a Wednesday evening, a little later in the day than I usually record these podcast episodes, but I am trying to get back into a bit more of discipline of getting one out every, weekish or so. And I know I'm going to be away next week, Sunday through Sunday, so the chances of me, while I'm out on vacation, actually sitting down recording something is pretty slim. And it was last Monday or Tuesday when the episode went out about the Who's Afraid of Dying episode. Got some interesting feedback from that, and I think I'm sort of in a phase right now where that's the kind of topic I'm going to talk about. Like, so today, I'm going to talk about identity and a little bit of Sartre, a bit of French existentialism, authentic being, the nature of existence and stuff like that. We'll see how long that lasts. I mean, it's probably a phase for half a dozen episodes or so, where the focus is on this sort of philosophical language or this experiential phenomenology. I think, actually saying that, what I'm gearing myself up to is this final round of edits for my essays, which are thoughts about that kind of subject, about mortality and the imagination. So I am probably using these episodes of the podcast to kind of springboard my attention and get warmed up so that I can really make some progress on that. I have a train ride on Sunday, and then also back on the following Sunday. And in fact, about a year ago, I took the same train ride out to New York and had a lot of success finally putting together what became the draft. So I'm actually kind of looking forward to the train ride out from Pittsburgh to New York. I still haven't finished Heidegger, which I may also read on that trip. Although I have continued to read it, and maybe I'll finish the part one on this vacation. I'm taking a trip out to New York, and then I'm there for a whole week. Listening to Wagner. My father and I are going to the Ring Festival at the Met. So aside from listening to Wagner, I don't have a whole lot of else to do. I might dial into some conference calls at work. And in fact, that is the first note that I have here on my talking points for today. So that's a pretty cool segue. There's a new conference call system at work, where the office where I work. So that means a couple of things. It means that the central bridge number that I call has changed. So I've dialed the same 855 number, I don't know, a dozen times, 20 times a day for the last 5 years, 7 years, something like that. That number has now changed. Although for the most part, I rarely dialed the numbers. It was all on speed dial or auto dial. But what really makes a difference is that the music that you get when you first dial in is now different. It never changed. And the old provider, that conference call, the music that they played was from the same 3 different snippets of music for, like I say, for half a decade. And now that's changed, and it's a real difference in the experience of the day, is that these little tunes aren't there anymore. As evidence of how successful they are, I actually couldn't whistle the melody of any of them right now, although they are so ingrained in my memory. We use this conference system for everything. We rarely call anyone directly. We just give a bridge number and people dial into it. Whether it's me and one other person, it's much easier to just dial into a bridge than to try and figure out which number to dial directly. Or if there's 50 people, if it's being used for a big presentation, or anywhere in between, a working group, a working session. It's used all the time. If we have work off hours if I'm at home. The number of times that I've been sitting at my dining room table with my cell phone on speaker, on hold, waiting for someone to start the meeting. Someone else is hosting a call that I've dialed into. Or out walking around, waiting for other people to start calls. And I assume then that everybody else has that same experience when they're dialing in to join meetings that I've set up and will be hosting. This bridge number is kind of an essential part of how we talk to each other through the work hours. But now it's changing. The music will change. So literally the soundtrack of my work life is different. That was a bottle of sparkling water opening. So that got me thinking about some of the other ways that I'm identified, or that I identify myself at work. And one of the elements that came to mind was the user ID that we're assigned. Right. So it's a combination of numbers and letters. It's probably based on some kind of algorithm. I don't know what that algorithm is, whether it's based on my name or the sequence of new people starting. But whenever you join as a employee, you're given this user ID, and then that's used everywhere to log into my laptop, to log into any shared system. Most of the applications that we use internally use that ID and password. My payroll system. Not the phone system, interestingly, but anything that's done internally uses that ID. And I've had that ID a really long time. So let me get a sense of how long a time. I've been in this current role, what did I say, 5 years? That's about right. Before that, I had spent not quite 2 years at another company. But I had left the company I'm now working for. I jumped for 2 years and came back. And before that, I started as a temp in 1996, 7, 8, 7, as a temp worker at this company over the summer, to make a little extra cash while I was still thinking that I would finish my dissertation. In fact, I was working that temp engagement when I ran through the sequence of events and mistakes and misguided decisions that ended up with me not finishing that dissertation. So then I hired on full-time. I flipped from contract to a full-time, still working in a very low-level operations role, right? Literally stuffing envelopes with diskettes that were being sent out to clients who used this application to perform connectivity with the company that I work for. And at that point, when I became a full-time employee, I was given this user ID. And so I've been back and forth a fair bit, right? So that was let's say it was 97. Let's say it was, is that right? 22 years ago? Can that be right? So can that really be right? Yep. Let's say more than 20 years ago, I was given this user ID. And I worked in this operations job for a bit, and I took some programming courses, like Visual Basic courses. It was the early 2000s, and right, the internet bubble hadn't burst yet before growing again, and anyone could get a job coding, even me. So I got a job coding, and then I moved around, and I'd left the company that I worked for without that ID, but for probably not much more than a year, I worked various development jobs. I was a terrible developer. Don't like it. Wasn't good at it. And then I came back to this company that I work for now. And when I went through the new employee, whatever it's called, no, not reunion, the new employee orientation, right? At the end of it, I was given a user ID, and hey, it was the same ID. I was actually really, really happy because I use that number even more than I use the bridge number, right? I use that ID 100 times a day. My computer locks if I don't do anything for 90 seconds. Right? There's all these security access. So I really do use that ID hundreds of times a day. And it sort of became a kernel of my identity. I mean, at that same time, I was also reading a lot of books by people like Israel Regardie and Dion Fortune. So books from what I think you would call the Western mystery tradition. Sort of secret lodges and Freemasonry and Masonic stuff like that. I was very interested in the idea of a magical avatar where you, in the frame of the group that you're in, the magical lodge, right? You take a name, and that name represents your aspirations as a practitioner, or your aspirations as a magician, or as a ritual, someone who's performing these rituals to know your higher self, or all the stuff that goes along with that sort of Western mystery tradition. Aleister Crowley kind of stuff, and I was quite involved in that way of thinking about things for a while, and I felt like this user ID was as powerful a magical avatar as anything I could possibly choose, because I'd read some books and hung out with a few people in a group and talked about these things. I didn't necessarily like what it represented. I mean, it took a long time for me to understand that what I did for that job didn't prevent me from being a creative human being, which is really what I thought. Particularly when I failed out of the PhD program, I felt that identity was no longer mine. And it wasn't that I was no longer not just a student at a particular level, but I wasn't a composer either. The connection between the PhD process and actually what my creative thinking was so tightly bound as identity. And then it was substituted with this work identity, and I spent a decade thinking I should be working somewhere else, that I should be working in a more creative environment, not a big corporation, but an ad agency. I mean, that's the kind of thing I was thinking of, something where I might write some music, or I might at least be involved in creating product of some kind. And I did actually get over that, but I'm 50 years old now. This was 20 years ago. It took decades to realize that there's a circuit of creativity inside me, inside you, and the action of the significant action is an action of honoring that, however that is. And there may be an audience, right? I talked a little bit a couple of episodes ago about a conversation Jordan and I had about what it is to play this music for other people. It's definitely a kick. It's definitely part of it. But the only thing that matters is this internal circuit getting clicked. And however that happens, whether it's with this sort of synthesis rig that I'm working on, or playing piano and taking piano lessons again and really focusing on extending my technique or how I think about music. The central core of what I think of myself now is really that synapses, right? That connection. I definitely still take a lot of thought and self-definition about the work that I do, the job that I do, but I feel like as I get older, it's like the tide receding, and what becomes more important is how I do what I do there. And you know, I'm fortunate enough to have focused on aspects of a career that mean that most of my work there, although it is in a technical world, and I work with developers and, you know, very serious technical people, but my skill set is very soft. My skill set is my ability to interact with a broad set of people in a way that just makes sense. I'm going to use the word authentic, but I don't want to imply that there's an opportunity to be dishonest. Everything is, excuse me, the opposite of authenticity is not inauthentic dishonesty. The opposite of authenticity is bad faith, right? This is where Sartre comes in. The necessity of authentic behavior as represented by that user ID. I mean, I don't want to leave that. It really does sort of shine in my inner landscape, this random assortment of letters and numbers that's defined my actions for, you know, a third of my adult life. Right? Let's assume my average working day is 10 hours. There's not a whole lot of left after that. And that ID is the avatar for that action. But I don't have to assume it would be bad faith for me to act that way because I felt that it was the way that I should act. I act that way because it's the way that I have to act, because that is the way that this click happens. I think that's my definition of an authentic action. And that there's tremendous freedom there, right? Like I'm definitely attached to the outcome of my professional career. I'm certainly attached to the financial necessity of it, but I'm also attached to the ego rewards of the position. I'm not going to say that I'm not, but they form a vanishingly small percentage of what I really think is happening on a day-by-day basis. And there's so I'm going on a bit here, but there's two other things I want to bring in, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here because I want to go back to what I should have brought in when we were talking about avatar and identity, because in the Bon Buddhist tradition, right, there's often a part of the meditation practice where the practitioner, me or you, visualizes consciousness being shot out of the crown of the head into a form, whether it's the visualization of a deity or a goddess, or whether it's a visualization of sort of pure consciousness. There's a very clear imagery of consciousness, your identity, myself, my avatar, right, my ID, shooting up the middle of my body and out the top of my head. It's a big part of a practice called poha, which is also included in the chud practice. Now, poha is a practice you can perform routinely in a sort of minimized version that helps cleanse karma, helps burn through obscurations, focuses the mind. But poha is also a practice for the moment of death, and when done at the moment of death, allows consciousness to transcend the bardos and seek either liberation or to choose to choose incarnation, without having to go through the confusion of the bardos. But it's dependent on the identification of core consciousness and then the expulsion of that through the crown head, through the chakra at the top of the head, and then into a well-defined image of an avatar. And chud, that's the practice that involves visualization of the ego as a corpse, and the cutting of that corpse, the dismemberment of that corpse, and the ego and the attachment. That actual part of the practice is performed when the practitioner is taking the form of Kuntujanmo, who's the Dakini, the tutelary deity of the practice. And there's a Poa practice within Chud where you take your identity, shoot it up into the form of that deity. Then that is the energy that actually performs the dismemberment. Because otherwise it's me doing it to me, right? I don't get beyond that me, that ego. So the visualization of the consciousness into the avatar of the deity. So all these different ways of thinking about identity, the elements that we associate with an identity, the signs that summarize that identity, or the labels that we attach to that identity. Around that user ID is all kinds of labels: program manager. Well, that's the only one I can think of, but that's my current title, right? So, not composer. All of these things that could be attached to it. Those labels are impositions. They could be impositions that I apply to myself, and that's the bad faith, right? Bad faith is not lack of belief, right? They're not using faith in the terms there that, do I believe in something? It's and it isn't necessarily a deliberate gesture or a deliberate move away from the authentic. We can spend our lives in bad faith, meaning that we never take an action that is perfectly thought through, right? The idea that we take an action knowing the full intent and outcome of that action and then choosing it. I have chosen to work in a large corporation and to write the music that I write within the time that job leaves me. I wasn't forced into that. I chose it. It took a while for me to realize that I had chosen it, because every time I tried to choose something different, something would happen that stopped me from moving. I would have interviews and offers and then not take them. Because some part of me had chosen the constraints and the limitations that this work and this job puts upon me. I think because I respond to that creatively in a way that I don't respond to unlimited free time. Although I'm certainly willing to test that theory. If someone were to give me unlimited funds and unlimited time, we would see how much music I actually wrote. But these are choices that I've made, right? It would be bad faith if I was doing this simply because I felt that I should. That I felt, I might have begun in bad faith, thinking that I had to take a job because I couldn't do the degree, and so because I couldn't do the degree, I wasn't a composer, and so I had to get a proper job. These are very trivial terms and very light language to describe an event that we all go through. These choices that we make, or these turns that we take that aren't choices, that are authentic or that they're in bad faith. And I think a lot of what I try to do with my music for myself first is to click that authentic synapses, right? Get that going. But I also feel like it's liturgical, and it could do that. It could act as an antidote. And when someone listens to this music, my music, or music in general, I think has this capability. But when I write, I try to be very thoughtful about this. That this kind of music, kind of sound that I think will consciously switch that authentic synapses for someone else as well. It's a sort of a shamanic idea, or I prefer the word liturgical. Here's a method, here's a mechanism with a goal in mind. And, maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, but there's a goal, right? There's an intention behind it. And, it can always be measured successfully. You could listen to it and think it sounds like a yak dying, or a cat vomiting, or a dying yak vomiting, or those are valid valid impressions. But at least you know what I'm trying to do, and I think that's important and useful. So I think maybe I'll wrap up there and get this out. Check out YouTube. Actually, speaking of sort of a specific synthesis sound, I've been working a lot with the touch control. I have the stereo field. It's called the landscape. That's the old gold circular circuit thing. I'll take a picture and put it on for the program notes. But that and the Make Noise No Coast form a really good portable setup. Anyway, I recorded 8 short sections and put those on YouTube. And I'm very consciously now thinking about trying to build up a bigger long form piece that can be played on a pretty minimal rig that I could carry someplace. This is the first part of it. I've got one more desktop synth that I'm going to include in that. But so ultimately it'll be just 3 or 4 pieces of gear, with the goal being that could drive, a 2-hour piece. Kind of an exciting, long, noisy, ambient a liturgical piece that would be performed. I'm putting these together, thinking of them as an instrument. So definitely check out the YouTube channel, and subscribe to the newsletter, because I talk about, or at least I keep links to this in the newsletter and send it out every week. So with that, keep your wits about you, and I will talk to you again soon. Thank you.